Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. What's up? I'm Neug, and I'm here with Franky, and we're your hosts of the PSI Effect, the podcast for people seeking to rise on purpose. Now it's time to pause, shift, and to ignite. Let's jump right in. Franky, how you doing today?
Nuge, what's going on, man? It's good to see you. I'm doing well. You know, like we always talk about, it's a target-rich environment in that there's a lot of things to do. Big focus for us right now in our household is we have a rising high school senior, so there's a lot of activity about closing out the school year and planning out this summer as we enter into this college application season.
Sounds good. Yeah, for me, it's summer. There's yard work, those types of chores, and I tell you, living in North Carolina and this Bermuda grass, they say is easy to manage. You can't kill it. It always looks bad, and there's always spots. There's always weeds, no matter how many people come and spray. It's like, I don't understand. I guess I'm just not a grass guy. I do okay with a plant or two, but I'm just not a grass guy. Because I tell you, it just seems like it's more difficult than what people let on. I tell you.
You're right on that. Because I got quite a bit of grass out here too. And I stopped trying to be, singular species grass, it's fescue, no, it's Bermuda. Like, nope, we're going to mix this thing up a little bit because this used to be a big old pasture where we live. So we're just going to keep it mixed up and it works out well. It stays green most of the time and I'm not that concerned about it.
Good for you. Well, so we got another episode here. Now we're going to jump into some things. I know our audience is listening in and wondering which direction we're going to take this thing in. And today we're talking about the habits that move you forward, right? Habits that move you forward. And so, as we talk about, setbacks being temporary and comebacks being legendary, the whole idea of the habits that we have, I think are important to consider whether they are, holding us back or moving us forward. So we're going to talk about the habits that move us forward, right? The habits that move you forward. So what do you got for us on that, Mr. Franky?
Well, it's like you said, we need to have this forward momentum because we're trying to transition from, whatever this setback is, whatever this crisis state, this chaos state that we're in. We want to be able to move to the point where we're ready for the comeback, and that just doesn't happen by accident. We have to be intentional if we want to have this legendary comeback. And, as the name of the podcast kind of infers, there's power in that pause. And, the habit that we're going to talk about today really kind of lives in that pause space. And I know we've kind of briefly talked about this on previous episodes about what happens during the pause. But for those listeners who may not have been with us for that conversation, Nuge, what are some of the things that should be going on with us during the pause?
Well, for me, first thing I have to do, and I think I mentioned this before, is that I have to be quiet and I have to go inside and hear my inner voice, right? I have to shut down the noise because when you're going through a setback, I mean, it's chaotic, right? There's just so much going on. Your emotions can be high and, you're just not thinking as clearly as you may normally do on a regular basis. And so for me, that pause means I just have to listen to that inner voice and find my footing, right, where I am, because, that chaos can just lead you down a path where you just don't want to go. So that's one of the biggest things for me in thinking about moving forward is first taking that pause and understanding, where I'm rooted, like, where am I at? And then I can move forward. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I like how you said that, Nuge, especially the part about chaos. Because if we think about, the sort of progression of things, we have our setback, we're in the midst of the setback and we're trying to get our footing. It is chaotic. And I think that's one of the most challenging aspects of starting to get forward momentum is trying to bring order, some form of order at least, to the chaos that we're experiencing. When we had this conversation about the pause before, I mentioned asking questions, and that ties in really well with what you were saying about kind of that introspection, being quiet, to kind of listening to your inner voice. But one of the important things that we can do during the pause is ask questions, whether it's questions, of ourselves, just retrospective questions to make us think about what's going on. And it's important that we ask the right questions. And that's really the first question to explore is how do we know that in our moment of chaos, we're asking the right questions? What do you think, Nuge?
Well, I don't think that we, in that moment of chaos, sometimes with that we do know if we're asking the right questions. I think that we scramble sometimes where we're in that crisis. So I don't know that we actually know the right questions to ask in that moment. And I think after reflection, some quiet time to or as they used to say, woosah, right? Once you get settled and grounded, I think then maybe you can formulate, some questions that kind of make sense. But I think sometimes in that moment, the questions just elude us because we're just so caught up, we're so hyped up at being, in that particular setback. I don't know that we really know the correct questions to ask. And so, you're in that fog of the setback and you're just, you're probably just stumped, right? I can think of, some times when I've been set back and just like, wow, did that just happen? Right.
Hmm.
So I don't know that we know the right questions to ask in those early stages of our setback.
And the what you described reminds me of a phrase that I've used before, in my professional life, and that's paralysis by analysis. There's just so many loose ends, so many things going on, so many different factors that may be contributing to what's going on that we're trying to take in so much information. We're trying to assess so much that we're paralyzed and we're not moving. So, the tool set that we're going to explore in today's episode is designed to at least try to help avoid that paralysis when it comes to the questions. Because you're exactly right about, we may not even know the right questions to ask when the situation arises. But the tools that we'll talk about today, the tool set we'll talk about, at least gets us started and can get us some forward momentum. And I hope that our listeners are able to take this and apply it to their situations.
Yeah, because when you're
But
when you're I just want to just point this out that when you're in that setback or when you're trying to figure things out, we talked about all of the things in your life that are vying for your time. I mean, that doesn't stop. That doesn't stop. And so now you have this problem, you have the situation that you're trying to work through, but those outside forces that have always vied for your time, it's still there. Right. So now you got to maneuver or you've got to navigate, the problem at hand along with those other things that are vying for your time. Could be your family, could be work, could be whatever. Right. So, again, I think that adds to the fact that, we don't always know what the questions to ask when we're in the early stages of trying to figure out where to go from a setback.
yeah, absolutely. And what we're going to talk about today is it's a statement and a set of questions related to the statement that can sort of guide us during the pause to kind of, like I said, to help us at least get a little bit of forward momentum and get our mind moving in the right direction so that we can gather ourselves and prepare for the shift in anticipation of the ignition. As we get ready to talk about this tool set, I think it's worthwhile. I can give you a brief overview of my background and how I came across this framework and how I became acquainted with it. I am a technology leader by profession. And the problem I encountered, I was in a bit of a crisis that, you know, team was working well. We were delivering the right things, but we weren't seeing the expected benefits. And that was largely because we weren't asking the right questions. Nuge, have you ever been in a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, outcomes are always important, when you're working through situations, you talk about being in a leadership role, and I don't think it matters what role you're actually in. I mean, outcomes are important. And so I think it's a little more uh, challenging, maybe somewhat more evident when you are working with a team and you have specific objectives, timelines, what have you, and there's the expectation of specific outcomes. And those can be glaring if you're not meeting them. And so, yeah, I've had situations in my career. I've been in management, and trying to achieve those outcomes, it's not always easy, especially if you've got folks who are new to their roles, new to the situation. You have outside unexpected forces that kind of knock your
Mhm.
team off the game. So, yeah, I've experienced a host of those kinds of things throughout my career.
It's very similar for us as, as individual people, as we are making our way through life. We have expected outcomes that we're seeking, and sometimes we don't achieve those outcomes when we feel like we're doing all the right things. And that's where I was in this professional scenario. And in trying to find some answers, I came across the works of a retired physicist that transitioned to being a kind of continuous improvement leader for manufacturing. This guy named Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt. He wrote this book called The Goal, and then he had another speaking engagement called Beyond the Goal. And then this Beyond the Goal speaking engagement is where I was introduced to the statement and the questions associated with it. So here's the statement that he made, and I'll kind of transition from there. So the statement that he made was about technology. And he said, technology can be a benefit if and only if it diminishes or removes a limitation. And I thought about that. And then I realized that the word technology at the beginning of the statement could be substituted with a lot of different things. We could substitute the word technology with change, process, action. So making it a little bit more relevant to what we're talking about as we try to navigate our pause, let's make the statement change can be a benefit if and only if it diminishes or removes a limitation. News, do you agree with that statement?
So give it to me again. Change.
Change can be a benefit if and only if it diminishes or removes a limitation.
You can't move forward sometimes without changing some aspect of what's going on in your life, right? And so, absolutely. I mean, that's a really strong statement. And I like how you changed it around and changed, no pun intended, the technology piece and instituted change, because I think that the change part of that statement or the way that it's presented is, I mean, you can personalize that, right?
Absolutely.
And so, that's kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about personal growth and personal pause, shift, and ignite. So I think that you really touched on something with that piece there.
And the other thing that I'd like to point out about that statement too is that change has to have a purpose. This statement suggests that change has to have a purpose. It can't just be change for the sake of change. It has to be, in order to be a benefit, the change has to diminish or remove a limitation. It
So
has to make something better.
so when you look at it that way too, I mean, you can apply that to what your goals are, what your personal why is for what you're doing in your life and why you're doing it in your life. So, if you remove an obstacle that's in your way, does that put you in a better position to achieve your goal?
Absolutely. So, with this statement, change can be a benefit if and only if it diminishes or removes a limitation. If we agree with that statement, we can use it as a focusing lens to ask a series of questions. And there are four questions that kind of go along with this statement. And this is the path that Dr. Goldratt took. And I found that not only does it apply, like we just discussed, not only does it apply to technology and in business and in professional settings, but it's very applicable to us in our personal spaces as well. So
Let's go. What's
if,
question number one? I'm
all
ready.
right. So question number one, when we're talking about the change, question number one is the question that we tend to answer the most completely. And that is, what is the power of the change? So let's use an example. So let's say that we have a situation where, hey, and let's because I'm getting older, when you get a little bit older, like they say, you get old enough, the check engine light is going to come on sooner or later, and you're going to have some health issues. So let's say, I had some health issues and landed in the hospital because, my cardiovascular health wasn't where it needed to be. And I needed to make some changes. I'm in the midst of this. I'm laying on my hospital bed and I need to make some changes. And I know that there's a new gym that just opened up down the street from me. So the change that I'm proposing is that, all right, I'm going to go to this new gym. So I'm going to evaluate this proposed change through the lens of that statement and these 4 questions. So the change in this particular case is I'm going to go to this new gym. So question 1 is, what is the power of the change? What is the power of this new gym? What are the benefits? What are the features of this new gym? It's got all the amenities. It's got the steam room. It's got the swimming pool. It's got instructor-led classes. It's got free weights that you can lift and make a lot of noise and nobody will complain. It's kid friendly. They have martial arts classes as well. There's all these different bells and whistles. And so many times we answer question 1 so completely because that kind of scratches our itch of human nature of, well, here's the nice shiny thing with all the bells and whistles. So we see all the bells and whistles of the change, and that's what catches our eye.
So I may be getting ahead of myself here. And just so the audience knows, I don't know the questions that Frankie has put together for us this week. But when you talk about that particular gym, I think about how many times we've made a commitment to ourselves that we're going to make said change. And in this instance, or in this example, the gym, right? And so we don't necessarily have at the moment the personal habit of working out at all. So I'm guessing that one of the subsequent questions are going to be around our own personal decisions and commitments to making said change.
You might be partially clairvoyant there, Nuge. We'll see. I don't know if folks in our audience are old enough to remember Miss Cleo, but it sounds like you've been hanging out with Miss Cleo. All right. So question number 1, that's the one, like I said, that's the one we answer usually the most completely. It's like, what's the power of the change? What are the benefits, bells, whistles, features of the change? Number 2 is the most important question that we have to answer because it's the question that lets us know how we're going to take advantage of the change. And question number 2 is, what is the core limitation that we're seeking to remove or diminish? We've got this change with all the bells and whistles, and that's great. That's nice. Great gym. But what is the core problem, the core limitation that I'm trying to remove or diminish? Because if I don't know the answer to that question, I don't know if I'm really addressing the problem. And the key here is to get to the root cause, not just symptoms. So in the case of the example we gave, where I'm, in poor cardiovascular health, or, I landed in the hospital because, my blood pressure was too high. I could say, oh, well, I'm just tired all the time. I'm not sleeping well, low energy. Those are all symptoms. That's not root cause. Distilling it down to the root cause of the core problem that needs to be solved. I have poor cardiovascular health.
That particular issue comes with a host of other, I guess, symptoms, right, of how we got to that point. The root for me is me. And I think I've learned that over time. I didn't know that, or I wasn't in tune to that in my younger days, but the root is me, whether it's, my poor habit of working out, whether it's my poor diet, whether it's my, just lack of movement, all those things that go with positive cardiovascular health. If I'm not doing any of those things, then the root of the issue is me because I have made a choice to have a sedentary lifestyle and not do some of the things that would make for having a better outcome for my health.
Absolutely. In our example, we're talking about things from, a health perspective, but, this same sort of mindset can be applied to any challenges we're having financially, professionally, when we're in crisis in our relationships, the same question still applies. What is the root cause? And even if the root cause does boil down to being me, I have to be able to translate that into actionable things that I can do to move the needle. And that's where questions 3 and 4 start to try to get us moving. So question 3 is actually a retrospective question. So question number 1, what's the power of the change? Question number 2, what's the core limitation or problem that we're trying to diminish or remove? Now, getting to question number 3 assumes that, well, this problem probably isn't a new one. And you've probably done things in the past to try to work around the problem or avoid it. You need to make sure the question you ask is, what have I been doing to try to deal with this problem so far? And the reason that's important is because we need to know what we've been doing, because obviously it's not getting the outcomes that we've been wanting.
Yeah, and I'm going back to the health one thought behind this because, just kind of hit close to home because not that I have had any health issues per se, but I know that I had gotten to a point where I was heavier than I wanted to be. And so I had to understand what I was doing or what I wasn't doing in my case to help to alleviate some of the weight. And when you talk about what have I done in the past? I mean, been all there's diets that I've tried, exercise regimens that I've tried. There's all this stuff, right? And at the end of the day, I think what it took is just me waking up and saying, you know what, you got to make the change, and nobody's going to do it for you, right? And so I had to consciously look at what I was eating, and I'll be honest, I have not changed what I eat. I just don't eat as much of what I normally eat, right? I've stayed away from, snack foods for the most part. But in terms of just everyday eating, I haven't changed the types of things that I've eaten because I've always eaten relatively healthy, but I have changed how much food I actually let pass through these lips. And it's working. So I'm happy to say that. So to go back to your question is like, what have you done to alleviate this situation? Yeah, I mean, it just hit home. It's just right on time for me because I have that current situation that I'm living through. So, and I like how you said that you can translate that to more than just health. And we talked about this in one of the previous episodes about finances and how when things get tough, we just want to sweep things under the rug and not pay attention to it, hope it's going to go away. But there's some root cause problems that we may have as it relates to finances and money. So I'm glad that you put that out there for the audience to kind of interpret that they can apply this to any number of things that they may be experiencing right now.
Yeah. And another way to maybe frame question 3 is, you know, what are the rules or processes in place that we have been using to try to deal with the problem? And the reason it's important for that is because when we get to question number 4 assumes that, okay, let's assume that this change that we're talking about does remove or diminish the problem or the limitation. Now that it's gone or diminished, what should the new rules or processes be now? So the key of question 4 is that it's forcing us to look at what we've been doing, how we've been acting, and just forcing our hand to think about, okay, now that this limitation is gone, now that it's been addressed, how do I need to alter what I do, how I act, what I'm going to do going forward to maximize the impact of the change that was made? Because if I say I'm going to make this change, but I keep doing the same things that I've always been doing, yes, I will have made the change, but I won't see the expected benefits of the change if I just keep doing the same thing.
That is so true. It just brings me to a phrase that I used to tell my team all the time, and this is teams through the years. Many people have heard this. If you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got. And I mean, it just speaks right to what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that kind of sums up the framework. And let me just give a quick recap. I gave the example of dealing with cardiovascular health, but like we said, this can apply to just about any situation that we're dealing with in our lives. So it starts with the statement, the statement being change can be a benefit if and only if it diminishes or removes a limitation. And if we believe that statement to be true, there are four questions that we ask ourselves to kind of start getting our thoughts moving in the right direction. Question number one being, what is the power of the change? What are the benefits and features? What are all the bells and whistles associated with this change? Question number two, what is the core limitation or problem that we're trying to diminish or remove? Not symptoms, root cause. Question number three, what are the things that we've been doing to try to address the limitation or the problem in the past? And then question number four, now that the limitation is going to be removed by this change, how do we need to change what we've been doing? What are the things, the rules and processes that need to be put in place now so that we maximize the benefit of the change that we just made? And hopefully this simple framework, these simple four questions in the midst of all the chaos that might be going on in our pause when we were dealing with our setback, hopefully these four simple questions can at least get the wheels turning, get our gears moving in the right direction and start inching us towards the shift that we need to author the ignition that we're looking for.
Outstanding. Yeah, and hopefully that statement, folks will take to heart and remember. We know how difficult it is when you're in the middle of a situation, chaotic situation or what have you. But taking that pause and remembering that statement and thinking about those questions certainly can be impactful.
Yeah. And Nuge, it really boils down to muscle memory, for lack of a better term, getting in reps, using a framework like this or just trying to keep our wits about us in, tense situation takes practice. It takes intentionality, trying to apply this in situations when you're calm, not just waiting to when things are on fire and thinking about this type of stuff. One of the great sayings that I've always tried to hold dear is that, we always like to think that when the situation happens, we're going to rise to the occasion. That's not true. We're going to sink to our level of preparation. So being intentional about our preparation is key here.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sync to our level of preparation and where we're comfortable. We can very easily go to our comfort zone, which in a lot of cases doesn't help us at all, right? So it doesn't help us move past the situation that we're dealing with. It may be okay for a few moments, but you got to step out of that comfort zone and to be able to move forward. So I like how you said that.
And I think that, there will probably be other episodes where we talk about other tools and techniques and other habits that we can employ along our journey to, help us iterate our way forward to the outcomes that we're looking for, to that comeback that's going to be legendary.
Yeah, and so I challenge our audience to replay this episode, to record that statement and those questions. And like you said, like you put in the work, right? Exercise that muscle called your mind and help yourself to achieve better outcomes in your personal life, which certainly I think will translate into better outcomes in your professional life with whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So, one of the things that I had for the audience, and it kind of plays into what we've talked about, and this is just, a challenge for our audience for this week, it was identifying a habit that is holding you back, right? There's certain things that we know are keeping us from advancing, right? Whether we want to admit them or not. So to write down, I mean, not write down, but to think about a habit that is holding you back, and then replace just, even if it's just a part of it, with a forward moving action, right? So if you know that there's some things that are holding you back, think about the four questions in the statement that Frankie has provided for us and start trying to replace those things with positive motion in the direction that you want to go, right? Make some changes in the old habits that you have that are doing nothing for you. Let go of those things that are not doing anything for you. to help move you forward, right? To make those changes, to understand how to get past where you are and put in the work. Like Frankie said, put in the work, do the work.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. I think that's it for now. We really appreciate you guys being here with us. And Frankie, I don't know about you, but I got a lot out of this segment, and hopefully our audience has too. So go be intentional about your journey. And remember that setbacks are temporary, and those comebacks are indeed legendary. So go and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.